Over the past several days, the United States has been building up military power around the Middle East step by step. First, American amphibious forces moved closer to the region, with Marines embarked on the USS Tripoli. Then came another wave. More Marines, more ships, and another major amphibious force centered around the USS Boxer. And now, the buildup is entering a new phase, because this is no longer just about Marines at sea. It is no longer just about warships moving into position. Now, one of the most recognizable rapid response formations in the entire U.S. Army is entering the picture, the 82nd Airborne Division. And that changes the meaning of everything. Because when the United States starts moving Marines, it could be preparing for presence, evacuation, crisis response, or limited operations from the sea. But when it starts moving the 82nd Airborne, the signal is different. That is a force built for speed, a force built for sudden deployment, a force built for crisis, and most importantly, a force built for options on the ground. So the real story here is not just that more American troops are heading into the Middle East. The real story is that Washington appears to be layering its military response. First, naval power, then amphibious power, and now airborne ground forces. That is not a random sequence. That is a pattern. A pattern that suggests the United States does not want to rely on just one type of military pressure. It wants flexibility, it wants speed, and it wants to be ready if the crisis moves beyond airstrikes, warships, and warnings. So what exactly is the 82nd Airborne Division? Why does its movement matter so much more than an ordinary troop deployment? And why does its arrival suggest that the United States may be preparing for something much bigger in the Middle East? Because once the 82nd Airborne enters the picture, the question is no longer just whether America is showing force. The question becomes whether America is preparing for the next phase. Tonight we break down what the 82nd Airborne Division really is, what makes it so dangerous and so valuable, and why its deployment could be one of the clearest signs yet that Washington wants far more than symbolic military pressure. This is not just another troop movement. This is the kind of deployment that makes the entire region pay attention. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand what kind of unit the 82nd Airborne actually is. This is not just another infantry division. This is one of America's most recognizable rapid response combat formations. A force designed to move fast, deploy under pressure, and arrive before slower, heavier units are even fully in place. That is what makes it so important. And that is also what makes this deployment different. Because if Washington only wanted to show presence, warships alone could do that. If it only wanted more flexibility at sea, Marine expeditionary forces could do that. But once airborne troops begin entering the picture, the signal becomes much more serious. It suggests the Pentagon wants something more than visibility. It wants speed on land. It wants options on land. And it wants those options ready before the situation gets even worse. That is where the 82nd Airborne comes in. For decades, this division has been associated with rapid deployment, crisis response, and the ability to move into unstable environments on short notice. It exists for the moment when military planners no longer want to wait. And right now, that may be exactly the point. Because the Middle East is not the kind of region where a crisis stays neatly contained. A naval confrontation can become a broader military standoff. A strike can trigger retaliation. Retaliation can threaten bases, shipping lanes, or U.S. personnel across multiple countries. And once that kind of chain reaction begins, speed becomes everything. That is why the current buildup matters so much. The Marines moving with amphibious forces bring flexibility from the sea. They can support crisis response, embassy reinforcement, evacuations, and limited operations. But the 82nd Airborne adds something different. It adds a force that is associated with immediate ground response. A force that can reinforce vulnerable positions. A force that can secure key terrain. A force that can arrive fast enough to shape what happens next. And that is why its arrival changes the story. Because this is no longer just a buildup designed to be seen. It is starting to look like a buildup designed to be usable. That does not automatically mean a ground war is coming. it does not automatically mean an invasion is being planned. But it does mean Washington wants more than one option. And that is the key to understanding everything we are seeing right now. The United States appears to be building a layered military posture. Warships for presence, Marines for amphibious flexibility, air power for reach, and now airborne troops for rapid ground response. That is a serious combination, and it raises the central question behind this entire deployment. Is the United States simply trying to deter a larger conflict, or is it preparing for the possibility that deterrence may fail? The 82nd Airborne Division is not just famous because of its name. It matters because of what it is built to do. This is a formation designed for rapid deployment into unstable or dangerous situations. It is associated with speed, readiness, and the ability to move faster than many conventional forces. That gives it a very specific place in American military strategy. When Washington wants time on its side, it turns to forces that can move quickly. When it wants a visible signal without immediately committing to something much larger, it turns to forces that already carry strategic weight by reputation alone. And when it wants land force options ready before the crisis reaches its peak, a unit like the 82nd Airborne becomes especially relevant. That is why this deployment matters beyond simple troop numbers. It is not just about how many personnel are moving. It is about what kind of personnel are moving. A standard reinforcement tells one story. An airborne rapid response formation tells another. It tells allies that America wants the ability to react quickly. It tells adversaries that the military posture is becoming more serious. And it tells analysts that the Pentagon may be preparing not just for pressure, but for contingency. That word matters. Contingency. Because military planning is often less about one single plan and more about building a menu of options. You prepare for the scenario where deterrence works. You prepare for the scenario where it partially fails. And you prepare for the scenario where events move faster than expected. The 82nd Airborne is the kind of force that becomes valuable in that third scenario. If a base must be reinforced quickly, it matters. If key infrastructure must be secured, it matters. If an evacuation requires protection, it matters. If military planners want to position troops where they can respond before a crisis widens, it matters. That is why the arrival of the 82nd changes the meaning of the overall buildup. Because now, the United States is not just assembling presence, it is assembling flexibility across domains. From the sea, from the air, and potentially on the ground. That combination is what gives the deployment its strategic weight. And it also shapes the message being sent to Iran. Because this kind of layered buildup suggests Washington wants to show that it is not dependent on only one response path. It can pressure from the sea, it can strike from the air, it can reinforce on land, it can scale up if necessary, and it can do all of that while still keeping the exact next move uncertain. That uncertainty can itself be part of deterrence. An adversary is often more cautious when it cannot easily predict which option will be used next. And right now, that may be one of the main purposes of the buildup itself. Not just to add strength, but to add uncertainty for the other side. That is why this sequence matters so much. Tripoli and its Marines suggested one level of seriousness. Boxer and another Marine force suggested a broader buildup. But the moment airborne troops enter the story, the entire posture starts to look more deliberate, more layered, and potentially more usable if the crisis expands. Now, none of that means a full-scale war is inevitable. That point matters. A deployment can be meant to prevent war just as much as to prepare for one. In fact, many military buildups are designed precisely to prevent an adversary from believing it has room to escalate without consequence. So this could still be fundamentally about deterrence. But deterrence only works if the other side believes the force being assembled is real, flexible, and ready. That is why symbolic deployments alone are often not enough. You need capabilities that look credible. You need forces that can actually do something if events move too far. And that is exactly why the 82nd Airborne has such value in moments like this. It is not only a signal, it is also a tool for rapid response, a tool for reinforcement, a tool for crisis management, and if the worst-case scenario begins to unfold, a tool for immediate ground options. That is what makes this division different from an ordinary troop movement. It brings political meaning and military utility at the same time, and that is rare. Because in most cases, the more symbolic a deployment is, the less usable it may be. But the 82nd Airborne is both symbolic and usable. It looks serious because it is serious. And it matters because everyone in the region understands what its movement usually implies: high readiness, fast action, limited warning, and options that can be activated very quickly. That is why the division's arrival matters, even if no larger operation ultimately happens. Its movement alone affects calculations. It affects how allies read Washington's intentions. It affects how adversaries estimate risk. It affects how military planners think about response timelines. And it affects how the region interprets the seriousness of the current crisis. That is the deeper meaning of this story. It is not just about one division. It is about what the movement of that division says about American strategy right now. The United States appears to be building a military posture designed to do several things at once: deter escalation, protect assets, reassure allies, maintain flexibility, and prepare for the possibility that events could move beyond warning shots and visible naval deployments. That is where the 82nd Airborne fits in. It is the bridge between symbolic presence and rapid action. The bridge between a signal and a capability. And when that bridge starts moving toward a crisis zone, people pay attention. Because history has shown that a force like this is not highlighted unless decision makers believe speed may soon matter. And in the Middle East, speed always matters once a crisis begins to widen. That is why this deployment deserves attention. Not because it guarantees what comes next, but because it tells us what Washington wants to be ready for next. That is the real significance. The 82nd Airborne Division is one of America's most recognizable rapid response formations, a force designed for speed, readiness, and immediate options under pressure. And its movement into the Middle East suggests the United States wants more than presence. It wants flexibility. It wants leverage, and it wants to be ready if the crisis enters a more dangerous phase. So in the end, the question is not just what the 82nd Airborne is. The real question is what its movement tells us about the road ahead. Is this a deterrent move designed to stop a wider war before it starts? Is it a defensive reinforcement meant to protect American interests in a volatile region? Or is it the early sign that Washington is preparing for a level of escalation that goes beyond ships, warnings, and air power alone? Those are the questions that matter now. Because once the 82nd Airborne enters the picture, the story is no longer just about military presence. It becomes a story about preparedness for the next phase. And that is why the whole region is watching. What do you think this deployment really means? Is the United States trying to prevent a wider conflict or preparing for one? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more military analysis, defense breakdowns, and strategic updates explained clearly, subscribe Military Deployment and turn on notifications for the next video.